Okay, why don't we pick up where we left off yesterday? Um, it's a bit, there's a bit of controversy among the poskim and a lot of these halachos where we're dealing with someone who is feeling coerced by a mafia type of individual who is trying to force him to give up the assets of somebody else. And the reason why it's a bit confusing, as we sort of discovered yesterday, is because there's a number of different opinions within the poskim. There's like there's disagreements within the poskim. First of all, how severe does the threat have to be before the person who shows the mafia guy the assets of another person? How severe is the threat? Does the threat have to rise to a feeling that I'm in mortal danger, or I could loss of life or limb? Or is it just that I could get all of my assets destroyed? Right? That was the first thing that we saw. It seems like the Rav Shulchan Aruch is paskening that only if your life is in danger do you have a right to give up the assets of another Jew. But as we'll discover, there are other opinions who say that even if he threatens you purely with financial threats, there are poskim who would say that you would be patur, you would be exempt from any kind of penalty if you end up revealing the whereabouts of your friend's assets, especially, and the lack of clarity is also regarding how specific the demand of the mafia person is. If the mafioso's demand is just, I need money, then to save yourself by giving up your friend's money is not permitted according to everybody. But what if he specifically says, I need you to take me to Yankel because he owes me money? So what kind of coercion rises to the level where it would be permitted for you to do that? And so that's where there's a bit of a discrepancy. And that's the last thing that we were discussing yesterday. Does he have to, is it only if he threatens you with life or limb that you're permitted to give up his location? Or is it permitted to give up his location even if he threatens to take your money? And you have nothing to do with the guy. And he says, well, Yankel owes me this money. Right? So under what conditions would you be allowed to surrender your friend's assets? Another issue which is controversial is what if he isn't just interested in Yankel's assets, but he's interested in Yankel himself? And he tells me, and he demands that you tell him where Yankel is. Are you allowed to disclose his location if you're worried that the guy is going to try and kill Yankel? Yeah, but at the same time, he may kill you if you don't reveal his whereabouts. So that's also an area which is a bit controversial as to what, at what point are you allowed to, and that's something else that we saw yesterday. At what point are you allowed to surrender Yankel's location in order to save your own life? And that was what we had seen yesterday, and we saw that there's a machlokus over there as well. Okay, so there's a lot of unresolved issues because there's a machlokus among the poskim. So another thing that we saw yesterday is that the language changes a little bit, because at the beginning of the halacha, there was a discussion of the mafia person demanding that you tell him where Yankel's assets. And then afterwards, the language of the halacha changes. Va'afilu onso lahavilo mamon chaveru. Even if he forces you to proactively bring the assets of Yankel to him, right? And that will be permitted only if there's danger to life or limb. And like the Imrei Yaakov writes, "B'das harambam de ba'ofen zeh chamur tfei." that what you're doing is actually more problematic when you actively, physically bring Yankel's assets to the mafia person. Kevin sha'asa ma'aseh biyadayim v'lo rak her'a bilvad. V'chein pasak ha'shulchan aruch siman shin peiches sif dalet. It's more problematic because you're aiding and abetting in a proactive way the mafia person to confiscate the Jews' assets. And this is how the Shulchan Aruch phrases it. Nasa mamon chavero biyado v'nasno la'anas chayiv l'shalim mikol makom. That the Shulchan Aruch says that, and this is what the Rav Shulchan Aruch was referring to, that if the mafioso compels me to actively, physically bring Yankel's assets to him, then I will be chayiv, even if I was under duress of threat to my life, like he held me at knife point, right? But because I actively brought the assets of Yankel to him, I will have to make compensation to Yankel. And this is true even if the king, a malevolent king, right? The sheriff of Nottingham or whatever, the government authority compels you. Aval harayvid hisig al harambam b'kasav da'av shenosa v'nosan biyad mikol makom kevin shonsu al haba in lechadover shomid b'fnei pikuach nefesh. He says the Ravid disagrees with the Rambam, and he says that no, since your life was under threat, nothing stands in the way of saving your life. V'hol v'yichadu lo b'feirush, and since the government or the mafioso specify that they want Yankel's assets, you're not obligated to give up your life just to preserve Yankel's money. And therefore, if you were in that situation, you would be exempt from having to pay back Yankel if the government or the mafioso specifically demands that person's assets. The Shach says the same thing, that you could be exempt in that situation if your life is threatened and they specify that they want Yankel's money. You will not be chayiv to pay back Yankel in that case. The dafka imansu al mamon stam azarmin dafshansu lahabi chayiv kishanasa biyad. He says it's only when they tell you they want cash, they don't specify whose cash, and you decide that you're going to save yourself by giving them Yankel's cash instead of giving up your own cash. That's when you have to make restitution to Yankel. That's where you're saving your own skin with your friend's money. In that situation, it's analogous. Let's say a guy is being pursued by a murderer with a knife. The guy's coming after him with a knife, and he tries to save himself. And in the course of saving himself, and he's running through the marketplace, and he's Indiana Jones running through the marketplace, and he ends up crashing into a bunch of things and breaks a whole bunch of pottery in order to save himself. So that's when we say that since you were saving yourself with your friend's money, you have to make restitution to whatever you broke. But if the person who is threatening your life specifies that he wants Yankel's money, so it's not like you're choosing to destroy Yankel's assets. It's the person threatening your life who specifies that he wants to destroy Yankel's money. And therefore, it's not analogous to a case where you would have to pay for it. And therefore, the argument goes, says the Shach, that you would not have to make restitution in that case. Since the mafioso is specifically saying, I want Yankel's money, if you end up refusing his demand, you may end up giving your life in order to save Yankel's money, and that you're never obligated to do. And right, you're not obligated to give up your life. So we see another machlokes. According to the Shulchan Aruch, anytime I disclose the location of Yankel's assets to the mafioso, I will have to pay back Yankel for having disclosed where his assets are. But according to the Shach, that's not true. If the mafioso specifically said, show me where Yankel's money is, because he's not interested in my money, he's interested only in Yankel's money, then I will not have to make restitution. And furthermore, even according to the Shulchan Aruch, who says that I will have to make restitution, that's only true before the money reaches the mafioso's hands. Aval anas sha'anas es Yisrael ad sheher ehu. Let's say the guy is holding a knife to my he's holding a knife to my body, and he forces me to walk with him to Yankel's warehouse, and so I show him where Yankel's assets are. The amod ha'anas al hamamon v'naser birshuso, and the mafioso basically takes over that whole domain where the assets are being held. So therefore, he sort of, either because he's a government official and he takes over the building, or he has some other way of showing dominion now over the place where Yankel's assets are. And he coerces the Jew to take him to another place. Once the mafioso is standing over and is in control of the assets of Yankel, the Jew who revealed the location is no longer going to be liable, even according to the Shulchan Aruch. In other words, I'm only going to be liable if I disclose the location, and then he goes and, let's say, has someone take those assets. But if the mafioso person himself takes over the domain where those assets are, then even the Shulchan Aruch will agree that Yankel is going to be patur at that point, because it's no longer in the possession of, by the time that the mafioso takes the money, it's no longer in Yankel's possession at that point. So there are a lot of reasons. Essentially what he's saying is that there are a number of reasons to not obligate a moser who is under duress of loss of life or limb, when he reveals the location of the assets to a government aggressor or a mafia aggressor. Okay. And then we said that's because there's danger to the moser's life. Sakana leguf nefesh, there's danger to his body and soul. Rod Salomer sheyakehu o yemisehu. Either he's going to rough him over, or he's going to kill him. And it's not clear, you don't know at that time what he's going to do, but you do know he's going to use physical force. Even if you don't know for sure that he's going to kill you, you are still allowed to divulge where Yankel's assets are. Ela ones mamon, and the only thing that we saw that some of the poskim question is, what if you assess that he wishes to kill Yankel? Are you allowed to tell him where Yankel is in order to save your own life? So that's where there are some poskim who say that, why is your blood any redder than Yankel's blood? And they say that you wouldn't be allowed to. But I think that has to be discussed also. It's very unclear. What if Yankel got himself in trouble with the mafioso, and the guy wants to kill him because he hasn't paid back his debts, or he wants to break his legs because he hasn't paid back his debts, right? There might be certain instances where Yankel would be justified if the guy threatens him, listen, either I take your life, or you tell me where Yankel is, and we're not going to kill him, we're just going to break his legs because he hasn't paid back his gambling debts, right? Or we're going to pay him a visit because he hasn't paid back his gambling debts. And you've been warning Yankel, don't get involved with the mafia. We're just going to, and Yankel is a ne'er-do-well, and he's involved in gambling and drugs and all of these terrible things. Is there ever an instance where it would be permitted for me to reveal where he is in order to save my own life, since I'm an innocent bystander, and Yankel is not an innocent bystander. He's gotten himself entangled up with these guys. So it's really not clear to me that it would be absolutely usher for me to divulge his location. But let's hope we never get into that kind of situation. Anyway, Ella ones mamon eino rashai lahatzil mamono. He says the other thing that the Rav Shulchan Aruch had done was quoting the Ramah, who said that if they're only coercing you by telling you that if you don't divulge where Yankel is located, we're going to take your money instead. They're not threatening you with physical harm. You're not allowed to reveal the location. He says that's the opinion of the Ramah of Al Kfar Nisparla, but we explained above that there are those who feel more lenient, and they say that even if the threat is only that they're going to take my assets instead of taking Yankel's assets, if I don't show them where Yankel's assets are, then I'm also putter if I reveal to them where Yankel's assets are. And you'll only be liable if you physically lead them to Yankel's assets. But if you just reveal to them verbally where they can find Yankel's assets in order to save them from taking your own money, not because of physical harm, here too there's a machlokas between the Ramah and the Shach as to whether it is permitted for you to reveal that information. Okay. And then finally, the last thing that we saw in this halacha, which is what we'll finish with, he says, he says, if the guy threatens you by saying, I'm going to take your money if you don't show me where Yankel's money is, we said that some people say that you're not allowed to divulge that information. That's only if Yankel's assets are not currently in your possession. Aval imasru chaveru biyadu l'shamro biyadu bo ha'anas va'onso litein lo eino chayiv lahatzil mamun chaveru ela al derech shenisbar behilchos mitzia ki al das kain kiblo min astam. He says, if you have Yankel's assets in your possession, the mafia comes to you and says, surrender the, whatever, the bronze statue or the gold bullion that Yankel left with you. And if not, we're going to take the value of that from your assets. So then you're not obligated to lose your own money in order to protect Yankel's assets if it's in your possession, as was explained in the laws of lost objects. He says, "Because of Haramban v'zelishana, sheyesh hefresh nifkad la'adam acher sheha'acher she'ansuhu lahavi mamono shel ploni min shemayahu dekansuhu ba'ach unsa denafal alav va'asr lahatzil atzmo ba'osa mamon shel chavero." He says, in a situation where Yankel's asset is somewhere else, or is being stored with another party, and then the mafia comes to you and basically says, surrender Yankel's bullion or we're going to take yours, then you have to view that as a heavenly sort of penalty to you, that God has basically said, I've decreed that you need to lose money, and you're not allowed to reveal where Yankel's bullion is. She'ein hamamon gorim alav klum, hilkach mikivin sheshalach bo yad nasa alav kegazlan lihischayev ba'onsin. He says, you're not allowed to sort of save your own skin by revealing where Yankel's possessions are. He says, and therefore, if you do sort of take them to where Yankel's assets are, you're going to be considered to be chayev for having caused Yankel's assets to be destroyed. Aval hanifkad shehu keba'olim yado ki yadam, rishuso ki rishusam v'asiyaso ka asiyasam. But if Yankel gave you the bullion to watch for safekeeping, and he basically makes you sort of his proxy to watch over it, Then when thieves come along and they want to take the Yankel's bullion, it's as if Yankel is right there with you. He says, in that case, when they're threatening you, you're allowed to surrender Yankel's possessions. And certainly, you're not obligated to surrender or give up anything that would be a threat to you in order to save Yankel's money, because if we view it as he's there, if he was there, he would also surrender the bullion to them. The kol ze ladas hasogrim de benasa biyad chayiv gam ba'onsin, abal kvar hu b'le'el sifkat nun alef divrei maschel lahavi de das hashachta gam benasa biyad pater ba'onsin shansu lahavi mamut ploni ayin sham. And again, this is an area of controversy. Will you only be exempt if it's in your possession and they put pressure on you, or will you be exempt even when the object is not in your possession? So the bottom line is that we don't really have any consensus in this halacha among the poskim themselves as to when a person will be liable or when a person will be not liable for having revealed the assets of Yankel. We also don't have consensus whether it'll be permitted for a person to divulge where Yankel's assets are if his life or limb is threatened, versus whether only they threaten to take his money. So there's a lot of still very gray area, I guess. But the purpose of this exercise is to point out that there's a variety of opinions and a variety of situations that may arise. And hopefully we never find ourselves in that kind of situation, even though this was a much more common phenomenon in the medieval world when these halachos are being written. Okay, so I think we're going to leave it here. I don't think that there's any point in dwelling on this halacha any further unless there's any questions or comments at this point. Okay, so I just want to get started on the next halacha, because this next halacha shifts gears in the laws of nizkei mamon, of damages to your friend's property, in much more of a practical situations that will happen in the real world today. And this has to do with hezek re'iyah. There's a term that the Talmud uses called hezek re'iyah, which is you can actually cause damage to someone by just looking at their assets, because the halacha acknowledges something called an ayin hara, an evil eye. And so that's really the subject of this halacha, that you're not supposed to be eyeing your friend's assets or property at a time when it is vulnerable to injury. And it's a very curious halacha, because I don't think secular law recognizes this at all. But let's take a look, and at least let's get started on this. It's based on the Gemara. The Rav Shulchan Aruch writes as follows: Asur lamod al sdei chavero lihistakel ba b'shah shehi omedes b'kamoseh. You're not allowed to stand at the side of your friend's field to gaze upon it at a time when it is fully grown. In other words, at a time when, let's say in the spring, when it's ready for its harvest. Shelo yazikena ba'ayin hara. Because we don't want you to damage it. In other words, you're not allowed to cause damage to your friend's property or to his crops with your ayin hara, with looking at it askance or with jealousy or contempt. That, let's say, your farm did not produce such a productive yield, such a great yield, and you're jealous, and you look at your friend's farm and you see how well it is done. So that you're not supposed to do. Okay? My wife and I went cherry picking a few weeks ago, and I think you drive to some place not far from Hamilton where you can go cherry picking. And I noticed that there were two farm orchards that had cherry trees, one next to the other, and one was doing a cherry picking business, and the other one was just selling cherries on the sidewalk. They weren't letting people go in and pick the cherries, but they would sell you the cherries directly. And it was interesting because I bought after we were finished with the cherry picking. I said, let's just buy some cherries, and maybe they'll be better, maybe they won't be as good, but we'll be able to compare, right? How the neighbor's cherries taste, because I love cherries. But anyway, so I buy from the lady, and I say, oh, we were just cherry picking, and she says, okay, great. So you can compare how our cherries compare to our neighbor's cherries. I mean, they probably were very comparable, but it was just interesting to me that they know that they're rivals. They have two different business models, but you can certainly imagine the neighbor looking out from her farmland, from her orchard, and looking out over the neighbor and seeing all the traffic of the people coming cherry picking, and she's selling cherries at the side of the road. Anyway, that's what I was thinking about when I looked at this halacha. So you're not allowed to stand at the side of that person's farm when the harvest is growing, because it'll cause perhaps something called ayin hara. Ve'ein tzarich lomar she'aser lihistakel b'chaveiro be'inyan sheyesh lachu sheyazikenu ba'ayin hara. And if this is true about your friend's farmland, then it's certainly true that you would not be allowed to look at another person with contempt or jealousy. If there's potential that you're gazing upon that person, will give them an ayin hara, will give their actual person an ayin hara. So before we go any further, we should really probably take a look at the commentary and learn a little bit more about this ayin hara deal. Okay, so first of all, the Imrei Yaakov, quoting from some of the later authorities, says, Yesh omrim de'ein ze ela mibidas chasidus, that this whole halacha of hezek re'iyah, of not gazing upon someone's property or upon their person, so that you don't give them an ayin hara, this is what's called midat chasidut, which means it's not the strict letter of the law, but rather it's an act of piety that is encouraged by the Rab Shulchan Aruch. It's not that I'm in violation of halacha if I look at his property askance, but I'm certainly in violation of basic ethical principles if I look with jealousy at my friend or his assets. Sheyazikenu ba'ayin hara. He says, I've quoted this already in Siman Daled Sif Chaf Gimel, something that the Chazon Ish had written, and we'll take a look at that tomorrow. And he writes, Ve'im hizik yesh omrim dechayev l'shalem midinei shamayim, that if because of my contemptuous gaze, I end up causing this person damage, some say that I will be held liable in heaven for causing that person financial loss. So more than that, we simply don't have. Let me just get up the get the source from Siman Daled. I'll bring it up. Let me just bring it up now. I'm just opening up my hard copy. Siman Daled, Seif Chaf Gimel. Okay. The Chazon Ish sort of tries to explain what the principle of ayin hara is. We saw this a long time ago. So what I'll do is the first thing that we learn tomorrow is we'll quote it from the Chazon Ish and from the previous previous unit of Imrei Yaakov. I'll find it in a previous PDF and I'll show it to you tomorrow. Okay. All right. So have a good day, everybody. And Ron, are you making a wedding or have you made a wedding? Is there a mazel tov?
Tomorrow.
A mazel tov.
Thank you.
Mazel tov.
All right.